Hi there, it's Dave here. This is the inaugural episode of Dave's Favorite Games, and on this episode I will be talking about Loom. Now before I start, I'd like to talk a little about what this is going to be. Those of you who have not played the games I'm going to be covering, don't worry, I will not be spoiling them. I'll try as best I can to use footage that does not give away any major plot points in narrative games or ruin too many of the puzzles. Now Loom is a very short game with fairly easy puzzles. I will actually be spoiling a couple puzzles, one right off because I have a story attached to it. But aside from that, the point of these videos is to share these games with other people, to explain why these games have had such an effect on me, and hopefully I can interest others in giving them a try for themselves. So without further ado, let's start with one of my strongest memories playing a video game. I borrowed Loom off a friend, I think in 94 or 95. It was one of those box sets that had a bunch of games in it. This one had Loom, The Secret of Monkey Island, I believe it had Day of the Tentacle, and maybe Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders. It was basically LucasArts, here are 4 great adventure games type of box. So I was about 11 or 12, I think. I was playing Loom. I started playing it one evening, I believe. And when you leave the island you start the game on, you come across a whirlwind that seems impossible to pass. At the time, maybe I was too tired, I can't quite remember the circumstances, but I could not find my way past the whirlwind, and I decided to go to bed. You know sometimes how the most vivid dream you have is the one right before you wake up? Well, I distinctly remember that morning, my dream was coming up to the whirlwind in the game, and then playing the song for the whirlwind backwards, causing it to unmake itself. Because at this point in time, I had not figured out how the songs in Loom worked, how each spell was actually 2 spells, one backwards, one forwards. So I wake up in the morning with that memory very clear in my head. I turn on my PC before anything, I go to the game, and that ends up being the solution to the puzzle. My brain had worked out the solution to the puzzle as I slept. Now, as amazing as that is, and it kind of clued me into how amazing our non-conscious mind is and how it can solve problems for us, I've never really had that happen again. So that's a one-off, but it's one reason I love Loom and think of it so fondly. Now, I did mention that Loom is a short game. This time playing it, knowing everything I've known 40 years now, I've probably played through the game about 5-6 times. It took me about an hour and 45 minutes this time, and I only got stuck really at the end because I had forgotten how to solve one of the final puzzles of the game. So it was actually a common complaint of the game at the time, was that it was a very short game, but even though it's only 2 to 3 hours long, it is a wonderful enclosed narrative. It's this beautiful fantasy adventure. You know, it's a world very different to our own. Apparently, it's a long time in our future where humanity has divided itself in guilds that practice certain arts, and the technology behind these arts is pretty much indistinguishable from magic. You are a member of the Weavers. You use songs to create spells, and you can basically weave reality. And that's where all the puzzles come into play, because you learn songs, and then not only do you have to work out when it is best to use these songs, but also you have to work out what the songs do, because when you learn them, it might not be completely apparent what that spell is for. So you write it down, you write down a word like flask, good examples early on. There's a dripping flask, and it gives you a spell, and you're like, okay, what does this do? Later on you learn it fills and empties water. So yeah, that's an example of that. The adventure itself, especially for an 11, 12-year-old, is quite dark. There's death in it, gory death in it. The version I'm playing right now is a little censored, so there is a certain scene near the end of the game that any player will probably have remembered. It has to do with the character Bishop Mandible, and that was not as pronounced as I remember it being. But you come across chaos. There's the spirits of the dead try and take over the land of the living. It's a lot more mature than I was expecting an adventure game of its type to be, especially at that time in my life, and even since, because, adventure games are usually whimsical, very, very light, even in their more dramatic moments. The Sierra adventures like King's Quest. There's a glimpse that the world is bigger than what you are seeing, which is a positive among any story. If you can create this sense of lore, the fact that you are a small part of something greater. Apparently, the game released with a 30-minute audio drama, but in all my time playing it, including this one, I have not yet listened to that audio drama, so my only frame of reference for this world is the game itself, but it still leaves a very positive, lasting impression. Now, there are a couple different versions of this game. I am playing here, the footage you are seeing here is from the FM Towns version, which is a Japanese PC engine. The version that is being sold on Steam and Good Old Games is the VGA Talkie version, which I'm not a fan of for a couple reasons. I originally played the EGA version, which has worse graphics than both the other versions, but it is completely uncensored and it has a consistent soundtrack. That's actually one of the main complaints of the VGA Talkie version, is that the music does not loop. Once you enter a screen and music plays, then you get silence. The fact that music is not consistently playing in a game where your main mechanic is to weave songs, it's a little disappointing to say the least. But also for me, because I originally played a version without speech, to hear Bob and Threadbare and all the other characters actually have voices can be, I guess distressing might be the right word. See, at the time, talkie versions were in their infancy, and they really didn't hire the best voice actors for most projects, although LucasArts were a lot better at it than Sierra and other studios. Anyone who's played King's Quest V can attest to that. Actually, on that note, I replayed King's Quest VI, which is another one of my favorite adventure games, about 3-4 years ago, but it was a talkie version. Again, as a kid, I had only played the version with text, so all the voices were in my head, and I had to turn the voices off immediately. It really soured my enjoyment of the game. So the FM Towns version that I'm playing has the VGA graphics, it doesn't have speech, and it plays the music constantly. The only downside is that because it's for a Japanese audience, some of the more distressing violence in the game has been censored. Now, that's not a complete detriment to the game itself, just a couple scenes, but people are funny when it comes to censorship. I myself am fairly anti-censorship, but I was willing to make this trade to have the superior audio-visual experience. Now, the music itself is basically the core of the game. All the puzzles have to do with playing notes on your distaff. All the spells are basically roadblocks that can be solved by playing the right spell at the right time. Sometimes it can be quite difficult not only to know what spell to play, but also to find what to cast it on. See, there is still a little bit of pixel hunting in this game, because sometimes your mouse cursor is searching for what to cast your spell on, even when you are unsure of what's needed to happen. This happened when I was a kid with the glass cutters, in terms of trying to reach a certain area within their city, and to know how to get past these people who are guarding a certain area. It took me a long time to figure out where on the screen I needed to cast in order to slip by them. So I'm going to keep this hopefully a little shorter than my State of the Channel address. I could blab on and on for a long time about this game, but like my State of the Channel address, I have written down a bunch of bullet points that I want to get through, and the final one is, why is Loom a favorite game of mine? Well, I think a lot of it was that it's a very interesting example of what games can be, especially when it came out at around, I believe, 93, 94. You know, Doom was around that time as well, and platformers were still king, so action games were really on top. Of course, for PC players, the adventure game was still very strong. The strategy games and RPGs were really starting to come into their own as well. But even among adventure games, this is kind of an outlier. The fact that it is so short, the fact that it is so easy. It's just very imaginative, with the beautiful classical music playing all the time, and dealing with the fabric of reality, and all these different guilds, and just the little story hints it lays here and here and here. And even there is an allusion to a sequel that never actually got made. Brian Moriarty has said a couple times that he had 3 games in mind where you actually played as different characters in each game. That would have been interesting, of course, but Loom is what we got, and it still is beautiful. I enjoyed my playthrough of it this time as much as I've enjoyed all the others, and I look forward to coming back to it time and time again. I hope some of you will check it out, or if you have played Loom, hopefully I've rekindled your memories of the game, whether you liked it or whether you didn't. If you did or didn't, please let me know in the comments. And I'm not sure how frequently I will do these favorite games videos, but I hope to see you on the next one. Thanks for listening, everyone.